will be leaders, and one of them is Andy Perchlik, and I've been knowing Andy for many years now, and I've served with him on several boards and committees. And from my personal perspective, he has a lot of integrity. He has a vision. He is inclusive in his thinking. He really wants to move Vermont forward in terms of preserving and sustaining our environment, but also to advocate for small towns and people who cannot afford housing in some places in Vermont, unfortunately. So I think Andy, I mean, he will speak for himself, you know, and I invite you to just listen and inform yourself so you can make an educated decision when you go to vote. And so the primary vote is something where very few voters participate, and so I encourage you really to go to and vote at the primary for the three candidates of your choice that you feel are most represent your interests. So without going any further, I let Andy talk. He can talk much better than I do.
Well, thanks everybody for coming out. This is great to see you all here. Thank you for Senator Polina for coming out, and thank you Johannes and Pamela for opening up their house and making the effort to get all these people here. It's not easy to get folks to show up on a nice afternoon like this to come to a political event. So I really appreciate the effort that they put into it. And I appreciate that you guys all came out, because I want elections and campaigns to be things that bring communities together. One of the reasons that I wanted to be a candidate is I wasn't happy with elections, both nationally, but even Vermont. Too often elections are things that divide our communities, and they're not events to build community. But I don't think it has to be that way. I think there's certain segments of our society or groups that want to create division through elections. They want to push people away from politics, and they want to make it an ugly fight and about opposing forces, and that divides us, and that's kind of what they want. And I want to try to create an election and campaign that brings people together and makes people excited about elections. It doesn't feel like, oh, politics, I don't want to talk about that. I don't think it has to be that way. I think we can do it in a way that's civil and builds community. So I'm interested in talking about that as well as some of the issues. But I am Andrew Perchlik, and I am asking for your vote in the Democratic primary so that I can be elected Washington County's newest state senator. I'll have a few applause breaks like that. You gotta figure out when those are. But I mean, overall, I want to be an active and engaged senator for the whole county. You know, I spent the last 20 years out in Marshfield, so I have a perspective of the small towns that we have. You know, we have 18 towns and 2 cities in the county, and I want to be a senator for the whole county. And I wanted to be active in going out there in the whole county and seeing what issues we can work on together. I think we have a real capability of a county to work together. I don't think there has been a lot of issues where the county, all 18 towns, or even a segment of the towns have worked together. And I think there's some opportunities there where we can get interests that support Waterbury, Montpelier, Barry, Northfield all together, that we can work on issues that affect the rural town. That, you know, we have 19 reps that at least represent one town in Washington County. So that's a good chunk of political power that if we work together, that we can make good things happen. So there's a lot of issues in Montpelier and the county that we'd like to work on. But when you run for office, people tell you to pick 3. So these are the 3 that I'm kind of focused on. One is what I call strategic economic development, an economic development that's aligned with our community's goals and values. I can talk more about that. And the other one is creating healthy societies. And mainly through the support of families and children. And also kind of what I would say, people that are living on the edges of our society that need our support. And the third one is clean energy and the growth of the climate economy. So the umbrella of being engaged and working for the whole county, and then working on these three issues: creative economic development, families and children mostly, and the clean energy economy. But before I go into a little more detail on those three things and take some questions or comments, I wanted to give you a little bit of background. Some people might know kind of my history, so I'll give you a little a biographical sketch. I am a flatlander, but not from a land that's known to be flat, because I'm from Colorado. And I grew up there. My mom was the main caregiver for the family, but she also had her own business. So I learned a lot from her about fiscal responsibility and things. She was a real estate agent, had her own kind of brokerage business that she did. And my father was a high school social studies teacher, but then he went and got his PhD and became a professor of political science at the university in our hometown. But he also was a politician, and that's where I got my interest in politics. I've always been interested in electoral politics. He was the mayor of our city for 2 terms, and then in 1972, he was not happy with the Democratic congressman that we had of that district, and so he ran in the primary against this guy, Wayne Aspinall, his name, mainly as a candidate against the Vietnam War. My father was a Korean War vet, but he was really against the Vietnam War, and the current congressman at the time was supportive of the war. So he didn't get elected, but what he gave me from that is this logo, which I guess I don't have it up there, but this logo of the tree and the bird was and his name underneath was the logo that my dad used in his '72 congressional campaign. So I reformulated it, modernized it a little bit to make it my own, but it's been really great for me and my family to see it used again. I think my sister said in Facebook the other day that the last time it was used when she ran for student council in middle school. But she did get elected, so I think it's a good omen there. I went to college in Colorado at the college where my father was a professor, so I went for free, which is a great gift, and it's something that I want to see our society be able to offer all folks, that they have either free college education or free some post-secondary education, whatever works for them. It's a tremendous gift that I was able to have, and I think it really is something that we need to try to figure out a way to make it work for others. But I did an interdisciplinary degree in environmental politics. I was interested in both the environment and politics. One thing that I discovered when I was in college was Vermont. If you're ever traveling west of the Mississippi and you're from Vermont, you find that a lot of people kind of have this loose idea of what Vermont even is. You'll say you're from Vermont and they'll ask you what state that's in. Yeah, I probably was one of those people, and so I met these really cool people, and they were Vermonters going to college out there, and they said, "Andy, you really got to check out Vermont. You would like Vermont." So I got an internship with an environmental group in Stratford, Vermont, and that summer I fell in love with Vermont, and I also fell in love with this woman here, Mary Ann Donahue, that was going to law school down the road in South Royalton to study environmental law. So we hit it off, but I was already scheduled to go to the Peace Corps, so I went back to Colorado. We did meet up a couple of times before that, but I went to the Peace Corps in Panama. Mary Ann ended up going to the Peace Corps in Paraguay. And then when we were done with our Peace Corps service, she had already set up shop here, so she got me my first energy job in Vermont as a VISTA volunteer in Addison County. I worked on a fuel assistance program also with Sean Stevens and Joan. Joan did it too? Just Sean. But that's where we met them. And I learned a lot that first year in Vermont because I worked with a lot of low-income folks. It was a fuel assistance program. I wanted to work in renewable energy, and Mary Ann said, "This is a renewable energy job." And I was like, "Well, it just seems like it's a fuel assistance job," but I cared about that. And I learned a lot. I met a lot of people, a lot of Vermonters that struggled to make winters bearable, and they would really be fearful when winter was approaching. They were like, we're really not sure how we're going to keep this old farmhouse warm. And I really have carried that with me through all the energy work that I've done about how we deal with this group of our population that is like energy poor. If they're not, have other poverty issues, they sometimes have real issues with keeping their houses warm. But then we moved over in this neck of the woods, and we moved to Marshfield, and that's where we raised our 3 children. And I was very active in there. I live in Montpelier now, so I'll be listed on the ballot as Montpelier, but I think people that might see that and think like, well, I've never known this guy in Montpelier. Says I haven't been active in Montpelier, but for the last 20 years in Marshfield, I've been on the volunteer fire department. I did that for many years, served in the fire department, did the training. I was on the Board of Civil Authority as an elected Justice of the Peace a couple times. Was on the Energy Committee, did other volunteer service. And then I was elected to the Select Board in Marshfield and did that for 4 years. 2 years I was the chair, but I resigned last year so we could move to Montpelier and Maple could go to the high school here, which has worked out great. And we really love meeting all the new friends that we've met here in Montpelier. So, and then the professional side of that, biographical sketches, we moved here. I got a job with the Department of Public Service with Scudder Parker, hired me, doing renewable energy policy. And then one of the things that we realized at the time is that we needed a business voice in support of renewable energy. That there was a strong environmental voice to say, how can we protect the environment with more renewable energy? But at the time, the Republicans controlled the State House, and they really didn't want to hear from VPIRG or from the environmentalists about energy. So we organized businesses, and I formed a trade association, Renewable Energy Vermont, that's still going today. Olivia can tell you all about it if you want to know more about it. But for a while, I worked half for the trade association, half for the state, and then 9 years ago, I moved back to the state, and I am the director of the Clean Energy Development Fund. I've been doing that for the last 9 years for the state. So I have a good energy experience of working with some low-income folks on fuel assistance, on the business side, on basically all the renewable energy technologies and the businesses we have in the state, and also from the state regulatory framework that I've done at the department. Because even though I run the Clean Energy Development Fund, I've been involved in basically all the different policy issues that the department runs on. So that's my little biological or biographical. Not biological. You don't want to hear that part. Sketch. So back to the 3 issues, and then I'll stop talking. You can ask questions or talk amongst yourselves. The first thing, the creative economic development, I think sometimes we're just doing economic development for the sake of economic development, but we have specific goals, and they're things that our communities and we want as a state, and so we can target our economic development to make some really progress there. For example, we need affordable housing. We have workers that need affordable housing, and so we can do economic development that support the construction of affordable housing. We can be creative in having people that have big old homes. How can we transition them to maybe downsizing their home?
Great idea.
You know, yeah. How can we be creative about that and make it as an economically viable choice for those folks? In public transportation, there's a lot of things that we could be doing that meet other goals that are also economic development projects. And I think we've done a good job with renewable energy, that we have a good, viable, vibrant renewable energy industry in the state. And that's because as we've worked towards our renewable energy goals, we've also tried to focus on how can we support small local businesses that are working in the sector. We could meet all of our renewable energy goals just by buying it all from Canada if we wanted to, but the economic benefit wouldn't really be there. So I think there's a good example with what we've done with clean energy that we could do in other sectors. The other, building healthy societies, I think really needs to be based on support of families and children. And again, ties back to economic development. If we want to try to get families here, young families to move here, or families to have children, we definitely need to have a system that supports people to have children. You know, the family leave bill that passed, that didn't get past the governor's signature, is definitely something that we need. We have a child care assistance program that's just basically underfunded. We have families that are paying 40% of their wages in child care, and that's after they get the state assistance. And child care workers are only making, like, I think the average is $24,000 a year without benefits. And so it's a broken system, and we can't have all the other things that we want to have if we're having families that aren't supported. And like the people that I work with, the state, which has good benefits, they might have one kid, but they're like, well, we don't know if we can afford to have another child. We don't have the maternity leave or the paternity leave that we need. we can't find health childcare for one kid, how could we do it for two? So we really should just focus our efforts on this early childhood age, because that's, if you build a healthy family and a healthy child early, that's going to be just better in the long run. It should be a no-brainer, but despite efforts, it's been difficult to get what we need to do. So it's something I want to work on. The third is clean energy and the climate economy. I could probably talk about that for a long time, but just say that it's definitely a focus of mine. I think we have done good work in Vermont focusing on electricity. We have a pretty clean electric portfolio, and we have a good plan, and we have some good goals, and we just need to move on down that road. But we don't have to do a lot of heavy lifting on that. But where we do need some heavy lifting and some focus work is on our transportation sector and our home heating sector. Those are still all, basically all fossil fuels. Where our electric portfolio is getting more renewable, and we have a way to get there. Our transportation and our heating is not. And we can do that with supporting local businesses in the forest economy with advanced wood heating and with electrification of our transportation. Our school buses could easily be all electrified, and we could be leaders in this. Vermont's not the only state that has goals of reaching 90% renewable energy. So if we lead on this and create businesses that are focused on that, those jobs and expertise could be exported to other states and other nations. I was just at a renewable energy event down in Panama of all the Central American countries, and they wanted to know what we are doing in Vermont. El Salvador, I learned, is the same size of Vermont, but they have 6.5 million people, and the same size of Vermont, but they have the same electric load as Vermont, because they still have a lot of people that don't have electricity. So they were looking at how we could what they could learn from Vermont. And the State Department that's why I went down there with the State Department to say, like, how is it that a small rural state, Vermont, has made the success that we've had? So I think it's important that we keep on that focus and think of it as an economic development, but also focus on the renewable energy goals that we had. I didn't really talk about the members of our society that are kind of living on the edge, but I feel like we can't have a healthy society if we have folks that are on the edge, whether that be mental health issues or addiction problems or other social issues or poverty. If we're not taking care of the edges, then the middle kind of falls apart. And we need to have a healthy society. We really need to make sure that everybody's taken care of. The other thing I want to end with is we'll just talk about elections. I mentioned at the beginning that I want to see elections be more of a process that brings communities together in discussing our future. And as a candidate, elections is something I can kind of deal with. I'm not an elected official yet, so I can't really actually work on that unless I'm elected. But as a candidate, I can be a candidate that's in a different way. And I'm trying to be the change that I want to see by talking about elections differently and just running my candidacy differently. One of the things that I say is that I'm not running for state senate. I'm just standing for election. Because if you're running, then it's insinuating that there's a race and that you have opponents. And I don't have any opponents in this race. I'm definitely supporting some folks like Anthony for sure, but I don't see myself as being opposed to any of the other candidates. And I think it's important that we think of it that way, even if you have somebody that you want to vote for, and hopefully that you would vote for me. I think it's healthy to think of it as everybody is winning, and not as a win-lose, that only the people that get elected win, and all the people that don't get elected have lost, that it's something that they've done. I think it scares away people from being candidates, because they don't want to lose. So I think if we can raise up all candidates and just say you won if you get out there and run a good, or are a good candidate and or help to bring communities together, then we should say all the candidates have won in that sense. But I am working hard to get elected, that's for sure. So with that, thank you for your attention. And I'll take any questions, and then I'm going to ask Anthony to say a couple words. If people have questions.
Yeah. So the big issue that kept the legislature in session for so long was about taxes and the governor's refusal to raise taxes. It seems like it's really hard for us to provide all the services we need without having some more money.
Yeah.
Do you have a position on whether it's possible for us to raise some more money in this case?
Well, I think if we grow the pie, then there'll be bigger pieces. So that's one of the reasons why economic development is one of my platform is we need to have that prosperity so that we can afford to expand the child care assistance program and things like that. Anthony could probably give a better answer about this year's budget fight, but it is difficult, and it is a discussion that we have with all the other representatives and senators on how to make those tough decisions. But I guess what I'm saying is that, for example, like childcare, it would be a priority, and that's something that I would argue over. I can't name what I would take the money from today, but it's something that I'm going to work for. That's a priority.
Okay, but it may not be a spending problem. It might be a revenue
Yes.
problem. So we may need to get more revenue and not necessarily wait to expand the economy. Are you willing
Right.
to consider some changes?
Yeah,
in
no,
that?
yeah, I definitely don't have a Scott view on taxes, yeah, or Bush. No, I think there are new fees and taxes that we could have to meet some of these things. Yeah, definitely.
I'm wondering what your thoughts are on working to create a state bank.
Yeah, Anthony worked on that. You could talk about it. So the question was about creating a state bank. And there's been some effort that I've been around about creating a green bank, which is just around kind of doing renewable energy and clean energy work. But I know there was a push a few years ago, and I think Anthony had a bill, and I think he, in the end, had a committee is all that we got out of it. But there's been a continued effort that I definitely support, and I think there's some value in having a state bank. I liked Anthony's idea of a state credit card. So I'm definitely supportive of that. I think the treasurer is a little reluctant on that, and I think we just need to convince her that there's a safe way of doing it. The one example I think is Iowa that has a state bank, but she kind of dismisses that because it was created in 1952 or something and under different circumstances. So I think she's open to listening to a reasoned approach on how to get there, but it'll probably be an incremental approach. But I'm definitely supportive of it. Yeah, Howie.
So I'm curious how you stand for office in a different way than running for office. I mean, I understand generically the concept, but how do you do it in a way that actually is different?
Yeah, well, something I'm trying to figure out. I mean, part of it is changing the lexicon. I think words do matter. So if you don't talk about your opponents and you don't talk about winning, and the headlines aren't, person X clobbers person Y in election, and they use a lot of military and sports metaphors, and the whole thing that the candidate won, but it wasn't the candidate that did anything, it was the voters that elected them. And I think, I'm hopeful that a change of the lexicon over time would have some impact on that. But I think also it's just not, which isn't a big problem in Vermont on the Senate level or representative level, where you're attacking the other candidates. But that would definitely be something that I wouldn't do. Trying to have a campaign that's just about negative things of the other candidates is definitely something you shouldn't do if you want to have a election that builds community. Sure.
Switch gears for a second. The opioid epidemic is just sort of drowning. If you talk to educators, for instance, you talk to the superintendent in Barry, he'll tell you that upwards over 50 to 60% of the parents, or the so-called parents that go to conferences now, are grandparents.
Yeah.
That the kids are basically have past generations because the parents are so filled with opioid needs.
Right.
One of the few rehab centers. Maple Leaf is now closed. There's one in Bradford, Valley Vista. It's about the only rehab in the entire state. I don't know if you've studied up on what your thoughts are on how to change it.
I haven't studied up on it so much. I definitely believe that we need to increase treatment and not just focus on incarceration for sure. And I think we need to support other states that are going after the manufacturers of the opioids that I think we're purposely selling them just to make increased profits. And I think there's definitely an opportunity for Vermont and other states to work together in suing the companies to prevent it from getting worse and to just make them pay for the mess that they created and use some of that money for treatment and support. I think things like, you know, supporting folks with good child care and supporting the old child care industry that is a well-paying job is going to support creating healthy families and healthy children to make it less likely. It's an indirect long-term goal, but short-term we definitely need to do what we can to support the folks that are addicted with treatment, because they're just going to cause other problems if we don't. Any other questions? Yeah.
Excuse me, can you talk a little bit about what thoughts you have or what vision you have for dealing with the long-term funding for clean water?
Yeah, other than that we should do it. Yeah, the question was long-term funding for clean water. You know, and specifically the estimate for Lake Champlain is, I don't know, 200 million or something.
Oh, 20 million a year for
Yeah.
the next 20 years.
Yeah, so where do we come up with 20 million a year? I thought the TDI project, you know, that was the transmission project that was going to go down the lake. They were going to be giving us, the state, like, I think it was going to be like $7 to $8 million a year for a lake cleanup. But we can't just rely on big projects that we can kind of get blood money from. So we need to find other ways to find ways to do that. I know from my work in Marshfield that a lot of the small towns that were far up the watershed kind of resisted some of the ideas for revenue because they felt like it wasn't proportionate to their problem. Something like the property transfer tax idea. But I definitely think that clean water is an economic development issue, and we need to have clean water. It should be a high priority. I haven't studied enough to come up with the solution on what that magic answer is. But I would work with those other groups that are trying to work on that, CLF and others that I know where clean water is a focus, and would support their efforts. Johannes.
What vision do you have in terms of affordable health care or access to affordable health care?
Yeah, again, it's not something I've had the time to really dig into, and I know that a lot of people have brought that up, and also education, Act 46 things where I haven't had the time to really dig into it. And so all I can promise is that if I get elected, it's definitely a high priority, and I'll dig into it and see how we can make progress in there, because I definitely think we need, basically universal health care. And I think, again, it's an economic development. We want to support entrepreneurs and innovation, but if you don't want to quit your job because that's the only way you have health care, you're not going to go start a small company where you're going to be without health care, or your health care costs are going to go way up, especially if you've started a family and that's the only way your whole family has health care is tied to your job. It's not a good way to do it for sure. Mm-hmm. But I understand the difficulty of a small state trying to enact universal health care. I mean, I wasn't involved, but just like the rest of you, read the paper and the efforts of the Shumlin administration to do that and how difficult it is. So I don't think it is just like we're going to do it. We have to find some other creative ways to make it work and get there, one step at a time through like Medicaid and maybe start first with universal child care or universal health care for children and things like that, and work our way towards that. And maybe team with the other states. I think other New England states want to see it too.
Could you say a little bit more about the left-hand side of your banner there, the sustainable farming and forestry? You mentioned it, but
Yeah.
what does that mean to you?
Well, definitely with the forestry, I support a working forest. I definitely also support that we have parks and wilderness protected areas. But if we want to keep forests as forests, we need to have them as working forests. That if they're not working and generating revenue, then people will divide them up and sell them. And then it's hard to have them as a working forest because you can't make it economically work as a working forest. And working forest, there's timber, but often to make a working forest economically viable today, you need to be able to take out other wood so that the timber can grow or the veneer can grow. And that's where advanced wood heating is I think a thing that the state should be supporting more. And what I do in my work for the state is working with forest and parks and economic development on the forest products industry and the renewable energy to displace wood heating with advanced wood heating. So it's not cord wood heating or open fire wood heating, which has high particulates and is not very efficient, but pellet heating with very high efficient pellet boilers and pellet furnaces. That Vermont is already the leader in this, but it's still very minuscule market. But we could be a hub of that for the rest of the North America that relies on heating in the winter. And that wood could come out of the forest in a sustainable way to meet our heating needs. If we're also always doing efficiency, efficiency always should be first. In agriculture, I think the agricultural businesses are the kind of local economic development that we could support. It's another example of, we have goals to have local, organic, sustainable agriculture. But are we really focusing on our economic development there? I'd say not so much. Anthony did work on a rural economic development bill that had some stuff in there about hemp and other things that we could do to support the farming economically. But I just would like to find other ways that we can support local food for local communities. Vermont could be growing more of our own food, and I think there's ways that the state could be more supportive of that.
So I imagine any elected official on the state level, there's just so many different things you need to research and consider.
Yeah.
Where do you plan on taking your cues from or doing your research with? Are there individuals or organizations or strategies?
Right, that's a good question. Yeah, because Vermont, none of the legislators has any staff or anything like that. Well, I would definitely rely on Anthony Polina for sure in his long service for some of this stuff. But like the Public Assets Institute in Montpelier that does a lot of good research is a good place to go to. Just kind of like look at the facts and know that it's unbiased, open and transparent information on a lot of issues that are facing the state. I've definitely been involved in all the kind of gamut of environmental groups and DNRC, CLF, and VPIRG, and the other acronyms, and I trust those groups and know a lot of the people that work there. I have a lot of faith in the CAP agencies that would do a lot of the low-income weatherization and service for on low-income issues. Capstone and Barry, I think, does a great job, and the people that work there are the people that are kind of out in the communities and in people's homes, and so they're great people to talk to when you're kind of questioning, like how is best, could we roll out a program that supports these people? You definitely need to talk to those people that are out there in the community.
I'm curious, if you are elected, what impact would that have on your job? Would you be able to keep your job at the state? Is there a conflict of interest, et cetera?
Yeah, it's a good question. So the law in the state contract, I'm a member of the state employees union, so by law they have to, if I get elected, they have to keep my job open for me. I would take a leave of absence during that time, and then they would come back. But more practical, I talked to the commissioner who I work for. I work under the commissioner, and she was very supportive of me being a candidate. That was good public service. Was very supportive of figuring it out when we get there. Kind of like, if you get elected, we'll figure it out. I think there would be some instances as a senator with my position at the Clean Energy Development Fund. If the Clean Energy Development Fund is still going, it's running out of money, which is one of the reasons I can thinking about being a candidate, because that job might end in the next couple of years. So if there's a question about funding the Clean Energy Development Fund and I get funded from the Clean Energy Development Fund, that would be something that I definitely wouldn't vote on or really get involved in.
Thanks.
Just one more question
Okay.
about pellets. I'm showing my ignorance now.
Yeah.
But there's been a debate about wood versus pellets. and I know you're advocating pellets,
Yes.
but I thought that you needed oil to make pellets. That's
No.
not true?
Well, you need oil to make, just like harvest wood. Nobody's harvesting wood and trucking wood. The whole value chain has got fossil fuel in it for any fuel. But as far as the mills, the pellet mills are all electric motors. Electric motors are better at pressing pellets. So that is electric. But there is maybe diesel in the transportation and things like that. That maybe
Not
somebody.
the making of the pellet.
No, not for making. There has been some kind of shady characters that have tried to add fossil fuel to the pellets to increase the BTUs or add plastics or waste. We're definitely not supportive of that. We only have one pellet mill in the state in Clarendon, and what for me personally and what the state's trying to do is build small local pellets that only get their wood from a 50-mile radius and do it from a sustainable harvest, and then deliver that to that same 50-mile radius to the businesses, schools, but also homes. And it's just as easy as oil. The truck just comes up, they blow pellets into a hopper, the hopper feeds them into your boiler, you just turn the thermostat. And
Is
it
there
can
a
be
certification in Vermont that reliably is
Not
clean?
yet.
Okay.
So it's still, the industry's still in its infancy. So there is some industry standards for the pellets, but not about the sustainable harvest. But that's something we need to work for, and something the Department of Forest and Parks is supposed to be working on. Well, if there's no other questions, I want to invite Anthony Polina, Senator Polina, to say a few words. I think he's going to do it from his chair. So if you want to turn around,
We can bring the chair.
I think he's just going to do it from
Yeah,
there.
I
He felt
would
better.
appreciate. I've got this leg thing going on. It makes it a little hard for me to hobble around. So if you don't mind, I'll just stay here. But I'll be pretty brief anyway. I guess the first thing I want to do is remind us that the legislature did some really good things this year. There was a lot of fuss and debate at the end of the session that people may or may not have really followed around the budget. But putting that aside, and actually the budget we ended up with at the end of all that debate was pretty much the same budget that we passed in the Senate and the House at the beginning of all these debates as well. So we worked really hard, went around in a lot of circles, and came back around to where we started, actually. But the legislature did some good things. We passed a bill that would increase minimum wages. We passed a bill to establish paid family leave program. We passed a bill to hold polluters responsible for toxic pollution. We passed a bill that would start us on the path towards cleaning up our water. We did a lot of good things. Now, the things that I just mentioned are amongst the things that the governor vetoed. So what happens is we've got these two contrasting things going on. We have a legislature that's doing its best to do what's right to improve people's lives as much as possible, and an administration that seems to believe that the government has no role to play in trying to improve people's lives. And it goes back to that idea about whether the role you think government should be playing or not. And I think that on the national level, and we're seeing it somewhat here on the state level in a quieter kind of way, is a movement towards trying to convince people that government doesn't really have an important role to play in our lives, and that we shouldn't trust government, that we actually sort of undermine the role of government, which then makes people not like government, which makes people then sort of not be engaged in the political process. So the reason why I say that is because it is really important that we continue to elect people to the House and the Senate that believe that government can actually be a force for good in our lives and stand up for people and do the right thing. And Andy is one of those kind of people, and that's why I encourage him to run. He's got the right background, he's got the right kind of personality, he's compassionate and visionary, but he's actually quite patient, and I think that's important for a legislature as well, because there's a lot of frustration that you put up with in the legislature, so you got to be able to deal with that as well. But the most important thing I would say for this evening and for the weeks ahead is that this is going to be a pretty low turnout of primary election. It's August 14th. I mean, I don't know how many of you think people are going to be inspired to deal with politics on August 14th. And actually, it's already started because you have early voting in Vermont, so you can vote any time you want now at your town clerk's office. But I just want to encourage people to do everything you can to remember to vote yourselves, but to drag a couple of your friends out to vote with you, because I think otherwise they're not going to do it. And it's really unpredictable. It's really hard to tell who's going to be able to win the race and win the primary, the open seat in the primary. But it's really important that the person who wins that is going to be the person who can actually convince his friends or her friends to drag enough people out to vote to make a difference. So I just really want to encourage people to talk to your friends about the fact that there is an election coming up. Remind them that there's an election coming up, and make sure that they actually vote, even if you have to drag them down with you when it comes time to do it. Because that's really what's going to make the difference. So that's really all I wanted to say. It's important that we maintain a government in Vermont that's responsive to people and is willing to try to do what it can to make people's lives better. That's not what this administration is doing. It's very clear that they're not engaged in trying to come up with ideas to help people. They're more interested in coming up with gimmicks near the end of the session to try to throw people off course and talk about no taxes, no fees, no nothing. But what it also means is that there's a lot of things that we don't get to fund that we need to fund. And there is plenty of resources in the state of Vermont. You know, nobody can tell me that we don't have money in Vermont to take care of the needs that we have to take care of. It's like I always mention to people, do you think we have less money today in Vermont than we did, 25 or 50 or 60 years ago? Of course not. There's more wealth in Vermont now than there's ever been. We're just not circulating it the way we used to. Our parents and grandparents built the interstate highway and sent a generation to college, built the dams in the river, built the dams that are taking care of our rivers. And we can't even fix the darn potholes when it comes time to fix our roads. And that's not because we don't have the resources, it's because we're not willing to spend the resources. So I just want us to remember that government has a good role to play. We need good people to make it play that role. It's really, really important that you remember to vote and that you drag other people out to vote. So that's all I want to say. I'll be willing to help answer questions if people have other questions, but I just really think the bottom line is nobody's going to win. Your person that you support is not going to win if you don't go out and vote. So please do that. Thank you.
Any questions for Anthony? If not, Marianne will finish it off.
I can come over. I just wanted to, everybody, I think I met most of you. I'm Marianne, I'm Andy's wife, and been helping with a number of things with the campaign, and just wanted to remind everybody of some opportunities that are coming up. Thank you all for coming. As some of you might have found out when you came in, we're getting organized for Dear Friend Cards, which is an invitation to send a postcard expressing your personal support for Andy to people that you know and people who are known to vote in primaries that from your community. We have lists that you can look at and decide, oh yeah, I know that person and I'm willing to send them a card along with the other friends that stand out in your mind as someone you'd send a card to. So that's all happening, and if you'd like to sign up, you can sign up for Dear Friend Cards. There's going to be a parade again. We had some support for the parades recently for the 4th of July, and we'll have another one in Barrie on the 28th of July. So if anyone would like to join us in the parade, it comes with a t-shirt, your participation. And we will have the horses again from Braveheart Beasts, a farm right located in Montpelier. A young horsewoman has been helping us with that project. So anyway, once again, part of engagement is conversing with us, keeping the conversation alive. If you're not satisfied with the questions you've heard answered today, stay on us, keep telling us what you care about. Help us find resources that you think are reliable for information, and staying in communication with us. Have I covered it all?
Donations.
Oh, and of course all these things. There's been a great demand for the lawn signs, but we're almost out. All of these things, of course, cost money, and we really, that money we rely on from individuals. Andy's not taking corporate donations as many other candidates have offered to do and are doing, but that means more people stepping forward and making a contribution. So we appreciate very much if you consider making a contribution to this effort. And yeah, there are. You can make it online. We have an online link, and you can do that from the computer right where Jane is sitting. We also have these envelopes that you can take with you and mail back a check or put a check in it here right now. And I encourage you also to like us on Facebook. We have Perchlik for Vermont Senate on Facebook, and that's the place where we're really regularly putting everything that's happening. It's the easiest thing to update. So appreciate if you like us on Facebook, share the page with people you think who would resonate with these values. Thanks again, everybody.